Good morning, Vietnam!
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
But don't ever take sides with anyone against the family.
Here's Johnny!
Whoa, this is heavy. I'm not even supposed to be here today.
Working on my day off.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Showtime with Roman podcast, the not-so-feature-length podcast where your host, Roman RBC, breaks down some movie news, trailers, reviews a couple of movies I may have seen, and then at the end of the show, we round out with a discussion topic of the week, anything regarding movies. Last week, we talked about what makes horror movies scary to you, and the week before that, I believe we talked about can movies be escapism, and so this week we have another interesting discussion topic as well, which I'll get to later. But first and foremost, last week I started recording around the time that some heartbreaking news regarding Bond 25 had dropped, so it was pretty unfortunate that I just missed that window to talk about it. But Danny Boyle, director of Trainspotting, and Steve Jobs has exited Bond 25 because of creative differences, and apparently it's because Sony wanted to kill Bond in this film, and Danny Boyle didn't want to do that. Now, if that's the case, that's pretty frustrating, because honestly, they should have just, let him tell a story. Give it to the director. You've given so many directors over so many years, the reins to their stories and allowed them to tell the stories that they've wanted to, whether it be Martin Campbell or any other director that you've had. And so, especially Martin Campbell, he's been a recurring figure behind the camera for these Bond films. And who knows, maybe he'll end up coming back for this one. I hope not. I would really like to see someone else. But speaking of someone else, they do have a director's shortlist, of which consists of Edgar Wright, apparently the guy that is directing White Boy Rick, and a couple other faces as well. But just to get to Edgar Wright real quick, listen, here's the thing. I love Edgar Wright as much as the next person, and I would love to see what a Bond film would look like with his hands on it. But the problem is that if Danny Boyle left for creative differences, then why would you target Edgar Wright? Because Edgar Wright is someone that is wildly creative and inventive, and he even left the Marvel Cinematic Universe because they wanted to mess around with this Ant-Man story too much, and he didn't want any part of that. He still got credited for writing, and that's probably why the first Ant-Man is one of the better MCU movies, because there's actually some sort of artistic merit behind what's actually going on screen, and that's with Edgar Wright. So I'm really interested to see where they go. As for Danny Boyle, it's really upsetting, because I thought he could have really brought in a lot of cool style to the film, especially with the word, him wanting to say he wanted to make Bond more of a feminist in this film, which would have been great, as it would have showcased more of the evolution of Bond, how we've seen this character grow and keep in touch with the times of cinema, and it's evolved just as cinema has evolved, and it's one of the reasons it's one of the better franchises out there. I haven't seen all the films yet, but if you look and watch from Dr. No to Spectre, you realize that so much has changed between then and now, whether it's the treatment to female characters, whether it's action sequences, camera lenses, performances, story, all that stuff. It's just evolved as the times have evolved, and I'm really excited to see where they go next. For anybody that wants Christopher Nolan, here's the thing. Christopher Nolan is one of my favorite directors. I think that he does a great job of giving audiences a great experience in the theater. But here's the thing. He's already made a Bond film. It's Inception. It's practically the same thing. It's a guy, he's trying to accomplish this mission. It's a spy film, espionage, whatever, trying to extract a memory out of someone's mind. Whatever it is, that's your Bond film from Christopher Nolan, and I don't think he has any interest in doing another franchise film. I think he wants to go off and make his own stories. So that's my opinion on that. So sucks that he's leaving, but hopefully they get someone interesting in there. Apparently David Mackenzie, director of Hell or High Water and the upcoming Outlaw King, which I talked about last week, apparently he's in the in the seat for that, or in the shortlist. So hopefully that'd be a really interesting casting. I think he's a really good director as well. But we'll see. Hopefully they can get someone a little more interesting in there, bring some more style and flair to the Bond universe. So that'll do it for that. Next topic, which is almost basically the last news topic. And originally, when I saw this, I said I wanted to talk about it. And then I saw it again, and I was like, do I really want to spend time talking about this? And then I obviously decided, because I'm about to talk about it, but Ethan Hawke, basically, he didn't slam Logan. He just isn't a very big fan of it. And I think that the problem is, and the reason I wanted to address it is because as the days go by since, his words, which I'll get to in a minute, I've increasingly agreed more and more with what he said. And I've also garnered a perspective of who cares, really. So before I get into more of that, he basically said that Logan is a perfectly fine superhero movie. Big businesses want us to think these movies are great movies, but they're not. They're not like a Ingrid Bergman film or a Bresson film. And it's just another one of these superhero movies with a guy in tights with metal coming out of his hands. Now, obviously, Logan, he doesn't wear tights in the film, but he does have metal coming out of his hands, and he is a superhero, and it's a comic book movie. And a lot of people have been very, 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 very upset as to what Ethan Hawke has said. One of the most prestigious actors in the world. He's a world-class talent. He's been in incredible films. He's also appeared in more films outside of Boyhood. What I find really funny is that, even a lot of people who critique Hawke have mentioned, like, I love him in Boyhood, and I've seen so many people say that, and it's like, well, Ethan Hawke has been in more films outside of Boyhood. So that just kind of goes to show how much people know about Ethan Hawke's filmography and how much of a great talent he really is. But here's the thing. Kind of like I just mentioned, who cares? Really? Like, this is one guy's opinion who didn't really like the film. He said it was fine, which means that he probably, like, if he were to give it a rating, probably like 2.5 to 3 out of 5. Okay? He didn't really like the movie. He says it's fine. It's just another one of these movies where, they're not very great, but big businesses want us to think they're great. Whatever, And here's the thing. I love Logan. It was one of my favorite movies of last year. It's one of my favorite comic book movies. It's just a fantastic movie. But I don't think it's nearly as great as some people make it out to be. Now, when I say some people, I would say I'm just going to rough estimate here, at least over 20% of the people I talked to last year after Logan had come out in the wake of its release. This movie subverts genre tropes. It's transcendent for the genre. It deserves so many Oscar nominations, whether it's Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Best Screen, Best Director, Best Picture. It deserves all these nominations because it subverts genre tropes and expectations of what we can come to expect from a comic book film. Now, like I said, as much as I love Logan, the movie isn't subversive. It isn't transcendent. Honestly, I don't even really think it deserved an adapted screenplay nomination. And I think that nomination was in there just to at least semi-please some of the people that are upset that it still didn't get a Best Actor nomination for Hugh Jackman, even though when you look at the best 5, nominees last year, they were all well deserving and more deserving of Hugh Jackman, despite his fantastic performance. It's a movie with a villain that is kind of an evil scientist. He toys around with these mutant genes, and he, implements them into these kids and whatever, and he's an evil scientist. And not to mention that Logan also faces a younger, more advanced version of himself, mirroring the fact that, well, Logan, he's old and withered, and now he has to overcome his younger self that is tearing him apart on the inside, because the adamantium is tearing him apart on the inside, which is fairly clever. A lot of comic book films wouldn't take that step to showcase that, that symbolism and that metaphorical value and implement that into their films. But, it's really nothing that we haven't seen before. So when I think about Logan, I think this is a great movie with a great 3-act structure, with a great beginning, middle, and end, with awesome characters, great performances in a movie that moves at a pace that is optimal, which I'll get to later based off of what someone commented. And that's all it needs to be. And that's all it ever was. Now, is it a revolutionary Ingrid Bergman film like Persona or Seventh Seal? No. Does it have to be? No. Is it a David Lean epic? You know? Is it an Akira Kurosawa influential masterpiece that's going to stand the test of time for ages? No. But here's the thing. Logan, it just isn't those things. And so when he says, oh, it's not any of those films, but people are talking about it like it is, because that's what he's implying. If you piece together his words properly, he's implying that people talk about this film like it's, the greatest thing of all time and it's some sort of revolutionary thing. Even if you never said that, I promise you, I have talked to plenty of people that think that. Which is strange, because even after I got out of Logan, I saw so many people saying it's subversive. It's transcendent. But how? How is it subversive? No one wants to answer those questions. What makes it subversive? What makes it transcendent? How is it subversive? But it's the same response over and over. Oh, it subverted our expectations. Okay, how? Please tell me more. And that's important. Asking about that next level. It's just like when I watch some YouTube film reviewers that say, excuse me. It's just like when I see these YouTube film reviewers, they say, oh, the cinematography is so great. And that's it. How is it great? Add another dimension to what you're talking about. What makes it a great shot film or a well-shot film? It's go to that next level. Ask yourself, what makes Logan a subversive film? What makes it a film that is actually worthy of being in the conversation of being Oscar nominated? And what I also find funny, too, is a lot of these people who hate the Oscars and say, oh, the Oscars don't matter, get mad when Logan doesn't get brought up in the discussion of being Oscar worthy. I remember that vividly, clear as day. So that's just kind of my opinion on that aspect. Another thing, too, and I knew I was going to spend a little bit of time on this topic, but Ethan Hawke also mentions big businesses want us to think these movies are great. Now, this is where a lot of people said, oh, this is very pretentious. It's very condescending of superhero films, thinking they're not worthy of, being considered art. And, comic book movies to me are a great form of art. I think it's one of the genres that has the ability to implement great action, great drama, great romance, great comedy. It's like one of the only subgenres out there that has the ability to include everything in its story, every genre. Well, you look at The Dark Knight Rises and Logan, very Western-esque, right? And the problem I'm having as a film fan now and as I'm growing and seeing more films is that I, too, believe that big businesses, Marvel, Fox, Disney, Warner Brothers, they do want us to think that these films are great. And Ethan Hawke has a really good point here, because studios listen to the money that's coming their way. They're not listening to word of mouth. So when they see that people are responding with money, they keep making more, because they're like, oh, people think these movies are great. But if you go look at the average rating on like Rotten Tomatoes or even like Metacritic, 7s out of 10s, 6 out of 10. Now, if on your personal scale a 7 out of 10 is great, then you're just one person compared to a lot of other people that I'm pretty sure would say a 7 out of 10 is fine. It's got issues, but generally it's a good experience overall. And I didn't hate myself while watching it. I didn't hate the film while watching it. It's a good watch, but it's got issues, right? So it's a fine film. But here's the thing. If you believe personally that Logan is a great film and is deserving of all these Oscars, then that's okay. That's fine. But now all of a sudden when we start getting into these subversive and transcendent tropes, it's like a trope alert at this point. When someone says subversive, trope alert, it starts going off, right? Oh, this is just another thing people are saying because the comic book movie is so good, blah, blah, blah. So when he says that big businesses want us to think these movies are great, I think he has a point, because they keep making more, because that implies that we think they're all great. There isn't a single MCU film that has gotten less than 60% critic approval on Rotten Tomatoes. That is outstanding. That is an outstanding achievement. Are they all great on a personal level? No. On a wider scale level, not really. Civil War has like an average rating of like a 7.3 or like a 7.4, I think. Avengers Infinity War has like a 7 or a 7.2. It's strange, but big businesses want us to think these comic book movies are all great because they keep making more and we keep going to see them. And general audiences keep seeing them over films like 8th Grade, Black Klansman, stuff like that. Which is fine. That's who they're trying to appeal to, and that's why people are going to see them over other films, because they want to use the 2 hours of their life with the $8 or $10 or $16 that they spent wherever you live or whatever theater chain you go to. They want to use that money and use that time to escape from our reality, and they want to go and watch these things that make them feel joy and some good drama and some good action, some good intensity in there, some good character development for the most part. But that's mainly for, casual moviegoers that do that, and that's fine. That's the way they watch movies, and that's what I'm going to get to here in a minute as well with the discussion topic. But in my opinion, in the end, Ethan Hawke, who cares? Who cares what he thinks about Logan? If you don't like what he has to say, ignore it. If you like what he has to say, let's have a discussion about it. Because to me, the people that generally agree or even slightly disagree with his wording or his approach are at least able to have a worthwhile discussion about it on the intricacies of big business, the intricacies of Logan, the intricacies of the importance of being a revolutionary film and deservedly being talked about being a revolutionary film. And I think that's important. And who knows, maybe 10 years down the line, so many films will be inspired by Logan. But right now, it's not transcendent. It's not subversive. It doesn't do anything different, really, that we haven't seen before. The only time we can talk about, this stuff is if someone said, oh, The Dark Knight isn't transcendent. It transcended the comic book movie genre. That's just the way it is. Even if you think it's a fine movie, it still transcended the genre. Because people started looking at comic book movies differently. So did studios. Look at the way they've approached the DC cinematic universe. That was probably because of The Dark Knight and Batman Begins. Christopher Nolan had a hand in Man of Steel, so that makes sense. You can't say that the industry didn't change because of Avengers or Iron Man, because it did. It's single-handedly changed the way that these studios output movies. It's the reason we got the one-hit wonder, or not even a one-hit wonder. We only got frickin' The Mummy in the Dark Universe. It's why we're getting Fantastic Beasts. It's why we got the DC Cinematic Universe. It's why you're getting all these spin-off films and all these TV shows that are trying to link up and line up with, what you see in the movies because of the Avengers. So in a way, you can't say that those films are transcendent because they objectively have. Because you can just look at the evidence with your eyes. You don't even have to see the product. It's there. So there are a couple instances where you can't say those things. You can't go back to Batman 89 or Superman 78 and look at, the context of their release and say, oh, these weren't transcendent or different. No, for their time they were. And that's important. But Logan, as it stands, and probably always will stand, is not a subversive or transcendent motion picture. Therefore, I think Ethan Hawke has a point. But if you don't care, it's just one dude's opinion. Don't take it so personally. And that's one of the reasons I started stepping away from the comic book movie genre personally. Just I feel so detached because maybe they're just not for me anymore. And I'm kind of burnt out on seeing so many every year. I'm someone who wants to be a film critic. I have to see as much as I possibly can. And on one hand, it kind of sucks because I have to see movies like Death Wish and Mile 22 or whatever. But, just don't take it so personally if someone doesn't like a movie. Or even in this case, he thinks it's fine. I can go out and find more reviews on Letterboxd that are way more harsh than what Ethan Hawke said. 100%. And that's just the fact of the matter. Just let the dude be. Don't call, all these people out here calling him overrated. He's always been an overrated actor. You probably haven't seen much of his work anyways, so whatever. He's one of the greatest actors of our generation, and I'm glad that we have him. And, I think it's really cool that an actor is able to speak out against, someone else's work in Hollywood. You don't see that often, and I think that's bold. That's really bold, and I think that's something that is really important, because if you go look on Twitter, you just see a lot of filmmakers praise the film, because, they're good dudes and they want to be friends with them. But Ethan Hawke, he don't care, and neither should you. So that's all I have to say about that. moving on to 2001: A Space Odyssey in IMAX. I saw that film last week, and boy, oh boy, what an experience. 2001: A Space Odyssey is already one of my favorite films of all time. It is one of the greatest films ever made, probably one of the single greatest achievements of all time. I would say it's one of the best films ever made, definitively. Right up there with The Godfather, Seven Samurai, so many other great motion pictures. But I've only seen it on my 32-inch Mac, which is the equivalent to a 32-inch TV. Funny enough how that works with all the measurements. But then I watched it on my iPhone 5 the next day because I didn't have access to the Mac, or right after I had finished watching it because I had seen it back to back. And then I saw it again when I got it on Blu-ray and watched it on like 65-inch TV. And then that's it. I haven't seen it in like 3 years in full. I've seen scenes, I mentioned last week how I watched like the Dawn of Man sequence just for like inspiration, sometimes when because sometimes I do get into like these little ruts where it's like, oh, do I really love film as much as I do? And then I watch certain clips and I'm like, yeah, I love this medium so much. So seeing it in IMAX was an out-of-body experience. As soon as the movie started, nice little overture, to set the tone, set the mood. And then the music kicks in with the title card and the planets aligning. And what a moment. Tears started welling in my eyes because I love this movie so much. And from then on out, it was just like I was seeing the film for the first time all over again. The Dawn of Man sequence, every sequence is just a masterclass in directing and writing. Imagine writing a script where you don't really have to hinge on dialogue like so many films do today. I mentioned a couple weeks ago or last week that Hitchcock quote, I use it all the time now. He says, it's a good movie where if the sound went off, you would still be able to understand what's going on. And I've been watching a lot of movies like that recently, and it's right. It's true. I've seen a couple of films where if you took out the dialogue, you wouldn't really have an idea of what was going on. Even if you threw up a couple dialogue card cues, you still wouldn't have an idea of what's going on. But you look at 2001: A Space Odyssey, that film is all visuals all the time. It's just an unbelievable experience. And if you don't get a chance to see it in theaters, I'm sorry, but if you have a chance, even if you have 4 hours to spend, just take that time to see 2001: A Space Odyssey, whether it's in IMAX or at your home. It is a very important film, and it's a film that released 50 years ago that looks like it was made yesterday. There isn't a single dated element, because to me, there's a lot of aspects that's about the evolution of cinema and how it's a tool that we shouldn't abuse. At the same time, it's definitely about evolution, human evolution, technological evolution, cinematic evolution. It's a movie about evolution on a multitude of levels. It's a masterpiece. The sequence, the Dawn of Man sequence, when that ape is learning how to, using the bone for the first time as a tool, as like a killing tool, with the montage of the animals dying and the music swelling up like we had seen at the beginning of the film. Masterpiece of a scene. Unbelievable. It felt like I was falling in love with film all over again. The precision, the beauty, just unbelievable. There's not much more to say about it. It's just a frickin' masterpiece. Just a frickin' masterpiece. 2001: A Space Odyssey in IMAX. The music was a little loud in sequences, but honestly, it only just made the experience all the more worthwhile because I felt like I was in those scenarios with those characters. So, masterpiece. So that'll do it for a couple news topics and a review of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I saw last week. And then, here's our discussion topic for the week. The discussion topic for this week is, what do you look for when watching movies? So this is something that was inspired by me showing my dad La La Land on Blu-ray last year, because he was like, oh, I don't really want to see it. It doesn't really look like it's for me. And I was like, no, come on, trust me. It's one of the best films of the year. Sit down, and I think you're going to love it. So we sat down and watched it. It was super late, too. It was like 10 o'clock at night. And at the end, he goes, dude, that movie almost got me crying at the end there. And I was like, yeah, dude, I told you it's a really powerful movie. It's really, really well written, well performed, it's just well directed. It's just a beautiful film. You really get invested with the characters. And he goes outside to have a cigarette, and he goes, "Here, come out here with me. Let's have a chat about the movie." So I went out there with him, and he goes, "So what do you look for when you watch movies?" And I didn't have an answer for him at the time. I said, I kind of just said a bunch of stuff. I was like, I don't know. I kind of just look at how it's all put together. I kind of look at how, everything kind of comes together with the performances. Does the director do a good job? And he's like, but how can you tell that a director does that well? And I said, I don't know. That's a really tough question. So then the next morning, I got on PlayStation and talked to my friend Tyler, and I was thinking about it all night, right before I went to bed. And I was like, what do I look for when watching movies? And I talked to my friend Tyler, and he's someone that wants to get into the industry as well and loves film just as much as I do, if not more. And I told him last night that I was going to talk about this, and I'm going to quote him. Because I'm someone that wants to be a film critic. I'm not a casual moviegoer who goes to the movies to just, have a good time. And that's fine if you do, of course. But for me, being a critic and wanting to be a critic and being someone that goes into a film figuring out, how it was all pieced together. He basically summarized it with this. He says, I don't look for anything. I look at everything. And since then, that's what I've abided by. Because for me, if I'm someone that wants to be a film critic, and this, I guess, can apply for anyone that wants to be a film critic. Again, I'm not the end-all, be-all of this discussion. But I think if you're someone that wants to be a critic, I think that when you go into a film, if you're looking for any one thing specifically, you're kind of cheating yourself out of critiquing the film, because then you go into a film and you're like, okay, I'm going to look and see, is the cinematography good? Then all of a sudden it's like, are you focusing on the characters? Are you focusing on the writing of those characters? Are you focusing on the direction? How is the director telling the story? How is he visualizing everything? How's the score? Does the score contemplate the film like mustard on a hot dog? Stuff like that. So then, if you go into a film and you're like, oh, I'm just going to focus on characters. Are the characters good? Because then I know a lot of people that say, I've seen a lot of people say that films aren't good because the characters are unlikable. I've seen people say that for There Will Be Blood and a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson films. And I think that's the point of his films. And I think that if you look at it on a grander scale, where you don't look at any one thing specifically, but look at everything overall, then you might not find those characters so unlikable. Or maybe you do find them unlikable, but the way that the story is told through the director's eyes and visualization of the script, maybe you'll come around on it. And that's just kind of the way I watch movies now. It is not easy to look at everything. But I guess on a basic level, kind of like what I said with the Hitchcock quote earlier, that's kind of, one thing that I kind of, is sitting in the back of my head every time I go see a movie is this movie going to be able to tell me a story with the visualization of the medium? Is it going to be able to do that? If not, then maybe your movie isn't good. It's exactly how I felt while watching Ant-Man and the Wasp. I said when watching Ant-Man and the Wasp, in the middle of it, after groaning after the 18th exposition sequence, if this film were to lose sound, I wouldn't be able to tell you what's happening, because I would need so much information. There's information overload in that film. And the cinematography isn't very good, because it doesn't really do much of anything to tell a story with its camera. Yeah, you kind of get the shots of like Paul Rudd's character, Scott Lang, with the ankle bracelet or the whatever, keeping him at home, blah, 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 little stuff like that. But overall, for the story purposes, for character purposes, you really wouldn't be able to get an idea of it. In certain instances, sure, but, all the specifics, not really. So I'm going to read a couple comments here from a couple people I asked on my Facebook account. I'm not going to be able to read all of them, but there's so many good answers. So if every single one of you are listening, thank you for listening, for one, and thank you for answering. These are all great. I wish I could read all of them. So Dan Purcell, who I had on in the earliest stages of the show, he says, I don't look anymore. Whatever happens in a movie happens now for me. If it's a story thing I marvel at, I marvel at that, but if I notice craft that supports the story, I'll marvel at that as well. Having the best of both eyes as maker and fan is honestly a wonderful thing to have in my viewing experiences, but that's just me. Brady Warren simply says optimal pacing. Good answer. Not sure, Rakesh, who I read a response from him last week, not sure I look for anything besides the director executing their vision well and evoking an emotional response. Some of the best movies I've seen didn't have the most original stories, but they were executed flawlessly. Logan is a good film that I think fits that bill. I wouldn't say flawless, but it's a movie that, it isn't original, but it executes itself really well. So, good answer. Michael K., genre specifics aside, I really only look for the movie to be the best version of what it wants to be, even if it isn't perfect. And if anyone knows Michael, he's someone that, he gets, people mess around with him sometimes for giving so many 5 out of 5s, but Michael he writes really good reviews, and this little blurb that he writes here perfectly defines who he is as a viewer. And that's one of my favorite things about Michael, is that if you read a review or you read any of his comments, you would be able to say that's who Michael's identity is as a film fan. And I think that's really cool. So great answer, Michael. Let's go ahead and read Musa's response here, because he's got a really... He always offers up some of the best, film-related answers I've ever seen. He's just a very intelligent dude. I've been asking myself this question a lot lately, because I'm still trying to figure out the kind of movies I gravitate towards and why certain things don't work for me. And what I've noticed lately is that the one thing I look for in every movie I watch is themes, or a theme. And the way in which the movie goes about speaking towards those themes. And then whether the movie evokes certain emotions within me, or whether I'm pretty cold throughout the entire thing. One thing I've noticed about myself is that I don't really care about the central narrative, but more so how the narrative, or lack thereof, supports the themes that the filmmaker wants to tackle. Which, if anyone knows Musa, he loves Sucker Punch. He loves a lot of these movies that don't exactly have the strongest of central narratives, but the themes and the director's vision is able to tell those story, or tell that narrative through its themes and through its characters and through the visualization. So a movie like 2001: A Space Odyssey fits that example really well. A film that he hasn't seen, and I know he's going to see, but 2001: A Space Odyssey is a film that perfectly encapsulates that. It's a movie that doesn't really have a super strong central narrative with so much meat around it, but it's got so many themes, just like Mad Max Fury Road, really, too. And then Noah Rudko, which will probably be the last one that I read, unfortunately, because I want to get to Tristan and Miguel's and John's and Jordan's and Mike's. I want to get to all of yours, but I'm running a little long. So Noah Rudko says, this is a really tough question. I usually have an idea of what a movie is about and what to expect. I saw Black Klansman with the assumption it would feature heavy political commentary, and I saw Crazy Rich Asians expecting a fun rom-com of a different culture. And I expect out-of-place jokes when I see a Marvel movie, which is probably why they don't bother me as much. The absurdity of the joke's mere existence is usually enough to make it funny. I agree with Ryan who commented earlier, which is why I didn't read his comment, because they generally said the same thing. I agree with Ryan, as long as movies are what they are meant to be, at least what I expect them to be, I'll enjoy it. I can't remember the last movie I saw where I had zero expectations, except for maybe Free Fire. And that ended up being an enjoyable movie because I was surprised at how well a 90-minute gunfight ended up being. Even if it dragged a little at times, in general, I want the movie to achieve its purpose, even if that purpose is to showing comic book heroes beat bad guys and make lame jokes. So, great answer, Noah. Again, really appreciate all the responses. And again, I think what Noah mentioned is really key. What Noah and Ryan mentioned is really key. Make sure you have an expectation of what the movie is. Now, when I go into a movie these days, I don't go in saying, oh, let's look at the Rotten Tomato score, let's read reviews. I don't read reviews anymore because I'm someone who reviews movies myself, so I don't want to get influenced by someone else's opinion before I see the film, because in their review, they could talk about specifics, performances, characters, Tom Cruise jumping off of buildings, Then when I go into the movie, I'm going to be expecting to see all of these things and be looking for those specific things. But I want to look at everything so then I can talk about the specifics in my review, if that makes sense. So, but I know a couple years ago when Goosebumps came out, I know a couple people that stayed away from watching the trailers for some reason, or maybe they just skipped by them or it got past them. But a lot of people were like, oh my god, I went and saw Goosebumps, it was so dumb, I thought it was going to be more horror-esque. And I was like, well, if you saw the trailer, you would know that going in it was a little more kid friendly. And he's like, oh, well, I shouldn't have to see a trailer before seeing a movie. And I don't know. I kind of disagree, because for a while I tried to stay away from trailers for a while too, because I thought they gave away too much information. But then I saw a couple films. I was like, oh, this isn't really what I expected coming in. And I think your expectations of what the film is trying to accomplish going in is so key, because I think that's a really important, expectation to have, so that you know what you're in for when you go in. Because if you go in expecting a horror movie and you walk out getting a kid-friendly, cheesy little Goosebumps movie, then you're going to have a bad time. And I think that if you want to stay away from trailers, that's fine. But I think you should watch at least one trailer, because I think it gives you a tone, it gives you a good vibe of what the film is trying to convey. And if you go into a movie and you're like, okay, this is what the trailer, conveyed to me, but it did a poor job of doing it, then all of a sudden you can say the director's vision isn't good, the writing isn't good, it's not nearly as good as the trailers made it out to be, or the tone doesn't make sense. It was just a trailer that existed to, please audiences just to get their butts in the seat for a mediocre movie. At Suicide Squad, that's a perfect example. So that's pretty much it on that topic. Let me know down in the comments below some of your thoughts. What do you guys think about Ethan Hawke's comments? I know that can provide a lengthy debate down below, unless you're tired of talking about it. Have you seen 2001: A Space Odyssey in IMAX? If so, what do you think about it? Have you seen it? Have you not seen it? If you haven't seen it, you should. And when will you be seeing it? Let me know. And then, what about this Danny Boyle news? It really sucks. Who do you think is going to come back and direct Bond 25 to continue this decades-long franchise? Let me know down in the comments below who you would like to see take over in the director's chair. Anyone besides Christopher Nolan. That is my challenge to you. If you can pick someone besides Christopher Nolan, that would be great. So thank you guys for listening. Have another great week of watching movies. Keep on, subscribing to, Hulu and Filmstruck and Netflix and all this stuff to keep watching more film. Also, make sure you check out the Talon Brothers podcast on iTunes. It's a great podcast, about an hour and 20 minutes every week. Just three dudes talking about film. So many news topics they cover. They talk about all the films they watch throughout the week, and it's just a joy to listen to because they've got that built-in camaraderie. It's a great podcast. Make sure you tune into that. Also, my girlfriend has a podcast on SoundCloud, What Do I Know with Joe, where she talks about something that happened in her life every week. Something good, something bad, and just wants to lend her voice to it and lend her opinion. She's got a really interesting episode that she's recording today, actually, about, going out to the clubs and going out and dancing and dressing specific ways and having to fend off those disgusting males that can't get their hands off of females, man. It's gross. So tune into that podcast on SoundCloud. It's a fantastic weekly listen. It only runs about 10 minutes long too. So it's just a nice, easy listen, and you just kind of get some perspective, and it creates a good discussion about, certain things. So check that out. Thank you guys for listening once again, and have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful rest of your movie watching week.